My name is Ryan Peck.
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
This is Soundtrack for Life, where we speak with a guest about a soundtrack that is important to them. Today, our guest is musician, author, and director Frank Meyer. Frank is.
Howdy,
Hey,
folks.
Frank.
Frank.
Frank has just released his new album, Living Between the Lines, which came out on March 11th. It's the first album he's released under his own name. So, welcome again, Frank.
Thank you. And that's not to say that I had a bunch of aliases, like I'm some sort of music outlaw, that, I had to use like fake Frank. That was Frank Miller for a while. It's more that for most of my career, I've always been in a band, either as the lead singer, or the guitar player, whatever my role is. And I finally just sort of after years of doing it as a band guy, eventually sort of decided to make a solo record because why not?
Yeah, and it's a great record, and you have some of your friends that you've played with in the past on the album. So, why don't you talk about kind of the album as a whole and how that came together?
Yeah, I mean, uh, essentially, the band I've been in the longest is called the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, an LA-based kind of punk rock and roll band, and I also have done work with a lot of other musicians. Eddie Spaghetti from the Super Suckers and I made an album together that was sort of like a collaborative record in the tradition of like when like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, like two outlaws, would go make a record together. And that was actually the first record that said like Frank Meyer on it. Every other record was Streetwalkin Cheetahs or my band in Europe, Trading Aces, or I was singing for James Williamson from the Stooges for a while, but those records came out as James Williamson, or we had a band, James Williamson and the Pink Hearts. But eventually I think it was kind of the record with Eddie Spaghetti. I just liked the idea that there was this. It wasn't really on purpose. It wasn't like I was trying to strike out, like I got to get out of the Cheetahs or something like that. It was more that the pandemic happened and like there wasn't, all of our bands got sort of grounded for a while. And Eddie and I are buddies and we live near each other. And we just started kind of working on stuff to keep ourselves busy and eventually put that out as an album. That record did well. And that kind of got me thinking like, oh, maybe this is a good setup for me to do some solo stuff. And I also like the idea that I could, if I went out with like a band doing my solo material, I could play kind of like any material from my catalog. I could play, hey, here's a Cheetah song, here's a James Williamson song, here's a song from the Eddie Spaghetti record. And then I guess really the only real big musical goal with the record is I just didn't want it to sound like any of my other albums because what's the point of it being kind of like a fast punk rock and roll record? People go, well, yeah, you do that in the Cheetahs. If it sounds like the Stooges, they go, well, you play with the guy in the Stooges. We've heard you do that, So I kind of decided that I wanted to go in a more soulful, kind of bluesy direction, but with lots of pop hooks. I was sort of embracing my inner Amy Winehouse and even a little Taylor Swift once in a while. I mean, not like any of the songs are overtly that pop, but definitely leaning into the idea of just trying to write really accessible pop hooks. My favorite artists, Tom Petty, the
Right.
Stones, these guys write great
Yeah.
songs that have great hooks, and that's why they're classics.
Yeah, I hear a lot of Tom Petty in the record, and I mean that in the most complimentary way.
I'm a big
Yeah.
fan.
Yeah, it's got a very
It's
like
really
roots
great.
feel. Eddie Spaghetti is on the record. Cherie Curie is also on there.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to put people that I had a personal connection with. So, Eddie, like I said, we made an album together and he was sort of among the inspirations to sort of strike out on my own. And Lisa from the Bell Rays, uh, my band and her band go way far back from the 90s when we first started off when we were all young and silly and ridiculous. But she's an old friend of mine. We've done a lot of collaborating. And Cherie Curry is not only a huge inspiration because the Runaways were huge for me, like really, really huge band for me and very inspirational. And I'm also a big movie buff, and she was an actress with a great, sort of movie career. But she also discovered the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. Like she came to one of our early gigs and kind of championed us and got up on stage, and everyone, around LA was like, who's this band that Cherie Curry's sitting in with all the time? And so that kind of got us signed and got our records, our whole career started making records and stuff. So I wanted to have people, I didn't just want to have like a bunch of random guests. It was like, if someone's going to do something, I want to write a song that means something to us and where we're, making some really cool art together.
Yeah, it's a really great record. These days we don't hear a lot of guitars anymore in in music.
A lot of guitar on this
So
record. I mean, that's what I started as a guitar player, so I'm always gonna, lean towards kinda guitar-based music, but there's certainly much more keyboards, and there's horn sections, there's ukulele. The 2 instruments that I kind of hate the most are ukulele and a toy piano, and the new single off the record, Blue Radio, literally starts off with ukulele and a toy piano, but it was only because I was giving myself a songwriting challenge, and I was like, I was like, I was listening. I learned how to play "Shake It Off" by Taylor Swift for this like cover band thing. Like these guys I knew were doing like a night of playing random covers, and they were like, "Hey, will you play bass in this thing?" And I said, "Sure." And they just gave me a list of covers, and most of them were in kind of my wheelhouse. And I was like, "Shake It Off" by Taylor Swift. All right, whatever. But as I was learning it, and I really wasn't that familiar with it, I was like, "What a great pop song this is!" And I really just kind of grew to love it, and it kind of got me interested in the idea of like, what is that formula? Like, there's a lot of formulas I've delved into, and kind of like, oh, I can do this kind of thing, and I can do that. But I was like, well, I've never even dipped my toe in that water of writing something so slick like that. So it hardly sounds like Taylor Swift, but that was kind of the jumping off point, was to like write something in that vein. I think it probably came off more like Amy Winehouse meets Cheap Trick or something. But that's okay.
yeah,
It's
that's
not
that's
bad.
a pretty good combination.
Right.
So if you want to check out the record, the lead single is "Baby Dynamite," which is a great way to kick off a record. But by the time this episode has come out, you can check out the whole thing, and I recommend that you do so.
Thank you. I should be recommending that to other people because I've heard the
Yes,
record.
yes,
You don't
yes.
need to
If you're
recommend it to me. I made it myself, so I've heard it actually a number of times. But to the other people outside of this conversation, yes, you should pick it
Right,
up. It's
right.
it's terrific,
Present
terrific
company
album. You'll
excluded.
be
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So Frank, today we are going to talk about the 1984 Alex Cox film Repo Man. So Frank, why did you select Repo Man for us today?
Well, Repo Man had a big influence on me as a kid in a lot of ways. The main one was the soundtrack. It was really kind of the first punk movie that I ever saw, and I saw it around the time that I also saw Rock and Roll High School with the
Mm.
Ramones, and there was Decline of the Western Civilization, which was a documentary. So, my parents had this early kind of West Coast, version of HBO, this cable network called the Z Channel. There's a documentary on it, and the Z Channel was sort of like an early curated movie channel, and I say curated, this is before anyone used the term curated, but, like, they would show lots of foreign films and lots of underground films, lots of documentaries, lots of music films, so stuff that, like, maybe at the time, weren't mainstream enough, for HBO or didn't have a wide enough audience for them to bother, like, purchasing because they, would sort of, like, purchase these movies for a while, to show them on their channel. And so Z Channel showed a lot of real offbeat stuff, and so I saw a lot of cool stuff, and I got exposed to a lot of indie movies and a lot of punk rock movies kind of all around the same time, probably around, like, 6th grade or 5th or 6th grade, something like that, of grade school. And the thing about Repo Man is the soundtrack is sort of a best of LA punk from the early '80s. So it's got Black Flag and Circle Jerks. It's got Fear. It's got the Plugs, who became the Cruzados. It's got a bunch of great LA bands like that. And then it's also got Iggy Pop with Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols, which I didn't know that at the time, but now I know that, doing the title track. So it's a really, my band is called the Streetwalkin' Cheetahs, named after an Iggy Pop song. And the way I very first heard Iggy Pop was the Repo
Oh,
Man soundtrack.
wow.
I also, yeah, so that's kind of was a
Big.
big connection. So I love that song, and that took me on the journey to Iggy Pop. I also now play guitar in the band Fear, and Fear is on
Right.
that
I
soundtrack
mean,
as well. And that's the soundtrack that introduced me to Fear as well.
wow.
So, if you look at it, not only did it sort of send me on my way as a little punk rock
Mm.
loving youth, but it also had a direct influence because, like, I started a band influenced by one song on there, and I joined a band based on another song on there that I'm in right now. So that all is kind of cool. The other thing about that movie is Emilio Estevez in that movie. There was another movie he made right around the same time called Nightmares, and it actually has Lee Ving in it as well, and has Moon Zappa, and it's kind of a horror anthology movie from about, 82, something like that, 81, something like that. I saw that, my mom used to take us to horror movies, so I saw the movie, like, in the theater at the North Hollywood UA6. I remember every movie that I saw at that theater. And I love that movie, and in that movie, Nightmares, he kind of is playing Otto. He's in the exact same outfit, he's listening to punk rock on his Walkman, he's like, "Hey, don't even talk to me." He's, like, totally attitudical, he's great, and so in that movie, he's playing this video game that, like, he can't win, and he breaks into the arcade and plays it after hours, and, like, the video game, like, erupts, and all the characters come out, and he has to, like, fight space invaders, and he gets killed. The next morning, they come in the video game, and Otto is a character in the video game. I mean, not Otto, but Emilio. So, I loved Emilio from that. I loved him from Repo Man. I kind of feel like there's a period in my if you went through my old photo albums or whatever, that, like, where I kinda dressed, I would wear, like, the jeans with the rips and then, like, the flannel tied around and the punk rock shirt, and I had the slicked hair, and I was basically trying to be a young Emilio Estevez for at least a good solid year of my life based on the movie
I
Repo
could
Man.
see it. Did you have the one earring, though?
Yeah. Oh, very much so. The little
Oh,
one, dangly one.
yeah.
Except the problem is I let mine I didn't the earring thing wasn't for me. I don't know. For me, at the time, everyone had poofy hair, and my hair was super curly and kinda wouldn't go, like, I couldn't really make it go, like, 80s and poofy like everyone, and so everyone had the dangly, all the earrings and stuff had, like, the Bon Jovi thing, and I couldn't do that, and so when I would wear them, it kinda just drew attention to the awkwardness of my face and, like, my bad hair, and my mom told me, because she did them with cork and a pin and ice. She did my
Whoa.
What
old
a
school.
mom. Wow.
Yeah,
The
and then
potato?
I when I t
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and when she told me that she's like, "And if you take it out for more than, like, a day or 2, it's gonna seal over," and after about 5 days, I was like, I just took it out and let it seal over. I don't like it. I don't have any tattoos either. I'm the only musician I know. I have no tattoos, no piercings, nothing.
It's okay. I respect it. I
Thank you.
respect it. I am curious, so your experience with Repo Man, did you know about the soundtrack before you knew about the movie? Because this is one of those rare cases where the movie kind of exists because of the soundtrack.
Yeah, I wanna say I think I saw the movie first on, like I said, on Z Channel, and then sought out the soundtrack because I loved the movie, and then got really obsessed with the soundtrack and started going to the record store and buying albums by the bands that were on the soundtrack, because I remember buying the Fear record. Well, the Fear record was probably the first one of those where I went out and bought the record based on the song from the soundtrack.
Right. It's interesting because, so MCA Records, which is the subsidiary of Universal at the time, they see the soundtrack and they go, "Is there a movie attached to this? Because we wanna release it."
Yeah, it's a great punk compilation, this
Right.
burgeoning scene.
Right, and they have this,
Yeah.
offshoot label, San Andreas, where they're like, "We really want to see this to see the light of day. What's the movie?" And so weirdly, the record label pressured Universal into releasing the movie, and then I think the soundtrack went on to sell like 50,000 copies, which is not too shabby for something, relatively
Yeah.
small, and then it becomes this kind of more cult classic, probably from ZTV, which I've never heard of, and now I wanna know everything about.
It's called Z Channel, and there's a documentary that came out maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, maybe longer, about Z Channel and kind of its influence on indie film and sort of spreading art art movies and indie films in America at a time, in early cable when there wasn't that many networks, and basically the ones that there were just getting whatever they could get. Meaning, like, there wasn't a lot of stuff that they could get at that time because not everything was made available because the idea of cable movie paid TV networks was a new thing, and so, like, licensing deals weren't in place. A lot of people just were like, "Well, no, we're not giving you our movies to show on your cable thing," and you know what I mean? Like, it was just this, crazy idea. So, HBO and, Showtime, Cinemax, Select TV, On TV, those were all the early ones, and all of them would just put on whatever the fuck they could get. You know what I mean? Like, that was the lineup. It's just whatever they could get in whatever licensing deal they could do. If they could run it 8 times a day, they'd run it 8 times a day. They could run it once a month, they'd run it once a month. Sometimes they do these deals for these one-off, sort of like comedy things and stuff, but mainly they just took whereas Z Channel was like I said, they would have a month of foreign films. That's what Das Boot I saw when I was a kid.
Wow.
I saw all the they had a Stanley Kubrick
Oh,
festival
wow.
in like
Oh, that's
1982. You know what I mean? Like showing, and I saw Barry Lyndon when I was a kid.
wow.
I saw there was a they did would do like a month of Australian movies. And again, this is when I'm like 8 years old, 6 years old. I mean, my here's another thing. Parents in my parents' era, they didn't give I can
Yeah.
curse
Oh,
on here.
yeah. No,
We
absolutely.
can
Let it
curse.
go.
Yeah. They didn't give a fuck about any idea of an idea that their kid shouldn't watch something, or that something was more adult, or that something was incredibly dangerous. My parents would let us, like we lived kind of up in the hills, and they would just let us ride our bike for like miles on our own on a Saturday. Just like, we're going to go to the theater 7 miles away and just ride our bikes. And they'd be like, all right, see you later. And cut to like 7 p.m. and we're like huffing it up this hill going like, this was such a mistake. Don't call mom. She'll never let us, do it again. And like they would just, here's the other thing that was on Z Channel. All the Emmanuel movies. You remember
Yeah, those
Emmanuel
are
Oh,
was
yeah.
like this like
not for
sex kitten.
children.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely not for
Not for
children. No. And
children.
I've seen every single one. I could tell you everything about Sylvia Crystal and Bo Derek because these were the stars of a lot of Z Channel things. And my parents just didn't care. They'd be like, "Honey, we're going to sleep. We left the Z Channel on for you." And we were like, "Fabulous,"
That's amazing.
Yeah, or back then it was like click. You had like the clicker, so it was like
Oh,
click, click.
yeah.
Yeah, Z
I mean, we're
Channel.
80s
Yeah.
kids too, and I do feel like this is why Gen X is built so differently because there was so much more freedom to explore.
Yeah.
There was a lot less. Like my parents didn't give a shit if I was watching Nightmare on Elm Street with my older sister at like 5. It
No,
was not.
they preferred it
Yeah,
because you were out of their head.
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? We don't care.
And if you were terrified, they were like, "Great, now I don't have to tell my kids some scary morality tale. Wes Craven just did it for me. This is great. Hopefully she'll shut up at night." You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I remember my parents took me and my brother to this movie called Evil Speak. It was my mom took us to see this movie called Evil Speak, and it was about a young Clint Howard, and he summons the devil through his computer at Catholic
My
school where
God.
he's being relentlessly
Clint
bullied and
Howard.
humiliated. And so, of course, once he gains the power of, computer Satan, he then, summons the devil and beheads and kills all of his classmates and all of the people that bullied him,
Oh, yeah.
as per the
Yeah,
tropes and the
naturally.
things. So at one point he summons all the pigs in the pigsty to barnstorm into the PE teacher's bungalow while she's showering naked, fully naked, and these pigs come in and are eating this naked woman. And I'm maybe like 7 or 8 years old, and my brother's like 5. I mean, we're little kids. Like, I mean, maybe, I mean, this is 81. Maybe I was 10. Maybe I'm 10 and my brother's like 7. Like, but way too young to be watching this. This is my mom's reaction. As the pigs are eating the nude woman, blood, entrails, boobs everywhere, she turns, she goes, "I think I've had about enough. I'll be in the lobby reading a book. You come to me when this is done." And left us there and went on to the lobby and opened up her Stephen King or Clive Barker because she loved horror. She just thought this was distasteful. But she had no problem with us watching. In fact, she didn't want to disrupt. She's like, "You guys stay here. I'll
Yeah,
be
she was like, "Too
come to me
too
when
far
the."
for me, but, have fun, maybe
Yeah.
switch to
But you
Sesame
have
Street
fun. Yeah.
after." Yeah, great. Amazing. That's so great. So I'm getting the impression that you did grow up in LA or the LA area, Frank.
Yeah, I grew up in LA. My brother and my brother's an actor, who you guys probably know from a lot of stuff. He's in a lot of 90s stuff. And I mean, he's still an actor, but a lot of people know him because his big hit movies. He did like a whole bunch of big
Yeah.
90s ones like in a row. Um, and he and I were exposed to a lot of art and artists very early on in our career, just growing up in the Valley in the early 80s, and getting to and our stepdad was, an entertainment attorney, and so we had opportunities, you know, as a kid to go to concerts, and maybe our folks would have backstage passes, and we would go back and it wasn't so much like, "Oh, we gotta meet celebrities," and it was more that, like, we gotta sorta see that there was this other side to, like, the big show that you saw is like, "Oh, but there's the artist hanging there with his wife, and there's the lighting guy," and, like, you kinda got the sense of, like, that there's a production involved, and then he would take us sometimes to, like, TV tapings at like, when they would film TV shows, and you'd kind of get to see that, like, oh, they go cut, and everyone kind of takes a minute and has a cigarette, and they're like normal people. So I think for my brother and I growing up in that atmosphere, this idea that like I could become a musician, and my brother could become an actor didn't seem like super far fetched because we were kind of growing up around it enough. Like our parents weren't artists or celebrities or anything, but like we were sort of surrounded by a lot of that. So it was easy enough when I got inspired to play music and I was like, oh, I think I might want to be a little rock star or whatever my sort of original version of that dream was, which was probably I want to be a rock star. It was like, I want to be a rock star like him. You know what I mean? Like like that guy's dad, or like my buddy's kid, or like this guy I know who has a band. You know what I mean? Whereas if you were like maybe in the middle of Kansas City, the idea of being a movie star or a film director, or a musician might seem impossible because you're like, well, I don't know anyone doing these things here. Like there's no film industry here. There's like one bar that has bands that I can't get
Right.
into. Like,
Right.
what am I supposed to do? You know what I
Right.
mean? So I don't know. I think we were very fortunate in that
Yeah, and
regard.
I think it probably that was probably a contributing factor, being in LA and having access to this movie, being interested in this movie, being, culturally interested in the punk scene. If you're in Kansas, you probably were like, trading tapes, but you weren't necessarily
Yeah.
as in it. This is very much an LA movie. I think at one point the script was supposed to be more of a road movie, but it's very much like 1984 LA, and
And
man, Los
downtown LA
Angeles.
specifically.
Downtown LA specifically, Los Angeles has never looked shittier than it looks in this movie. I mean, it
And there's
is
no traffic.
just chef's kiss. No traffic, looking real
Yeah.
shabby. Uh,
I also love that there's all these cool little touches too where like, every time he goes to see his parents, they've got, like, these religious shows
yes.
on that are
Right.
saying this really outrageous, very apocalyptic, just, "We're gonna take all your money,
Right,
everything!"
right.
And the parents are just sort of, like, in a daze
Mhm.
in front of the TV, and then whenever there's products around at either in his house or at the store, at the liquor store, the bottles just say, like, alcohol
Or
or
food.
Yeah.
beer or wine or food, you know what I mean? Like, everything it's like
Cornflakes.
it's this weird kind of alternate reality in a way where like there's just a lot of things that are a little off and a little
Right.
tweaked about that movie, which I still love, but I think as a kid that was definitely one of those early films where I was like, oh, whoa, you can like kind of just be
Got
weird.
a great point of view. It's been described as punk rock meets science fiction in Ronald Reagan's house, which is pretty
Yeah, I
real.
could see that. Yeah, I could see that.
It's got a great point of
That
view,
makes
though. It's
sense to
got a
me.
great sensibility about it that is very much its own wavelength. Uh,
There's a lot of great quotes in
so
it too,
quotable.
like
Yeah.
let's get sushi and not pay, or come on, man, let's go do some
Yeah.
crimes,
I've
you
been
know?
repeating the "Let's do some crimes" in my head, but it's all about
Yeah.
that delivery. The delivery in this
Yeah.
movie is so good too. Harry Dean Stanton, what a legend.
Right.
Is so good, yeah. Ordinary fucking people, man. He's doing lines of cocaine. He's ordinary fucking people,
The life of a
man.
repo man is intense.
It's always
Yeah, Life for
intense.
Repo Man's always intense, yeah. And I love, like, there's just all this crazy stuff in that film too, and a lot of it I love that they kinda don't even bother explaining too much 'cause it allows you as the viewer to, like, kinda put together your own version of this universe, but, like, there's, like, a rival repo gang that's
Yeah.
menacing them throughout the movie, like, pulling up and be like, "Fuck you," and, like, trying to smash their car and getting in fights. They never really explain, like,
No.
what is going on with that or why. It's just this idea that, like, "Hey, man's life is always
Yeah,
crazy. You don't know what's going down." So there's, like, rival repo gangs. There's, like, the government is all around the city with these like trucks that are like scooping up homeless people and like looking for like aliens. And there's this sort of kind of like you said, the Ronald Reagan sort of like government is like right in your shit on this movie and sort of on the streets kind of watching you. I love that idea. There's definitely a sci-fi aspect with the whole aliens in the trunk and the ending and all that stuff. And then the punk rock aspect. And then there's an odd sort of kind of love story with with Otto and that girl, but I love it because they both kind of acknowledge that they don't really care about each other, but kind of like, yeah, but you're kind of entertaining me now and this is fun. So hey, cool. And like that's sort of enough.
Until the end where he's just like, "Fuck that, I'm getting in the car."
Yeah, no, which is great. You know what I mean? She's like, but Otto, Yeah, it's a great movie, and like you said, it has a great sensibility. It walks a great line between being kind of irreverent and aloof, and yet feeling very much like it's saying something about, Los Angeles, that time in society, and kind of like the working class and the government. Is just, it's not like a huge conspiracy movie thing, but it's definitely got a lot of little messages going on about society at that
Yeah,
time.
the world building in this movie is great.
Yeah,
This Repo Man
absolutely.
code, and then you've got the lady with the metal hand, and
Metal
Yeah, there's
hands.
all that.
yeah,
It's a
Yeah,
sequin
I
glove,
forgot.
but that's fine. We're
Yeah,
gonna accept
what?
that.
Hey, it's supposed to be a metal hand. I believe.
Budgets,
I'm with you on
budgets.
metal. Hey, yeah, budget exactly, exactly. But yeah, you're right. I never thought about that, but like, yeah, there's a lot of sort of like world building in this. And then the whole scientist who's like running around town and he's like, dying from radiation from the aliens. And again, they don't really give you much of his backstory, except he briefly gives it in that one scene before he just passes out. Like when the Otto finally runs into him, he's sort of hallucinating and dying from radiation. He kind of spouts off a little bit of his story, and then that's it. But I like that they just leave a lot of things kinda hanging like that.
yeah, and in between all this is some great music.
Yeah, you got that right, partner. Another, good companion piece to this film, if you wanna kinda see the real life version in a way, minus the aliens and, roaming gangs of Repo Man is watch Decline of the Western Civilization, the first one, because there's 3 of them, and the second one is equally as incredible, but for completely different reasons. Um, but the first one is a documentary made by Penelope Spheres right around the same time, and it's a sa and maybe you guys have even talked about this on your show, I don't know,
Not
but it's
yet.
it's a do it's a documentary about the LA punk scene from this exact era, and it has Fear, and it has the Circle Jerks, and it has Black Flag. It also has X, it also has Alice Bag, and, The Germs, and it's a really amazing movie because it basically kinda gives you a day in the life of each band followed by their performance, and you get to see this great range because there's all these, like Darby Crash, for instance, is, like, cooking eggs in his apartment, and, like, he's sober-ish at the time, and he's, like, kind of this, like, cute kid, and he's, like, real political, and he's telling you all this stuff, and he's kinda lovable when he's making eggs, and then they show him on stage, like, 8 hours later, and he's totally fucked up and a wreck, and you don't understand anything he's and it's mayhem and chaos, and you're just like, "Whoa, what happened?" I mean, drugs is what
Right.
happened, but, like, it's crazy, and it's got Fear. The first 3 minutes of the Fear performance is just a series of fights, you know what I mean? There's massive brawls
Right.
going on. You get to see John Doe and Exene being just these brilliant poets, and, the whole thing is just, like, it's like the real life version of what was going on that kind of inspired Repo Man in the first place, the music and the LA punk scene and the underground scene in downtown LA.
Yeah, we haven't covered that film. We have covered
Well, you
yeah,
just did. Now you're good. You can just scratch that off too.
we did, but Spheris obviously went
Mhm.
on to do Wayne's World 1,
Mhm.
so we did
Well,
bring it up.
yeah, and she has done a couple other movies that are very LA punk. There's a movie she did called Dudes that has Lee Ving from Fear as the main bad guy, and it remember when you were saying before that there was an early version of Repo Man where it was more of like a road
Mhm.
movie? That's kinda what Dudes
Mhm.
is. Dudes is like 2 punk rockers go on this road trip and end up pissing off a biker gang who are trying to murder them, and they kinda go out in the desert, and they take peyote, and they have these visions, and they gotta fight these guys, and the whole thing is set to, like, punk rock and from the '80s LA. It starts off in the LA clubs. It has John Cryer as the lead guy. It's great. Dudes is sort of in that vein, and she did another movie that's really, really fucked up called The Boys Next Door, and it's with Charlie Sheen and Maxwell Caulfield, and, young Rune Zappa is briefly in it, and, Paddy D'Arborville, I think is his name. Anyways, this movie, which came out in the same stretch of '80s kinda LA and takes place in LA during the same time, is essentially these two guys from just outside of LA, like Palmdale or something, like an hour or two outside of LA. They graduate high school and basically just say, fuck it. Let's just go do whatever we want. On their way out of school, they literally like run over one of their classmates, like send her over the, roof, get into a fight, they get pulled out of the car, get into a huge fist fight, tear off, go to LA and basically beat, rape, and murder everyone they run across. There's homophobic stuff, but it's the 80s, so like everything was homophobic. But I mean, it's overtly like they're like, let's get that guy. They beat up an old lady, and like nothing redeeming happens the entire movie. Like one guy just gets killed, and then the other guy kind of just goes like, well, I guess, and that's it. Like it's the craziest movie because it sort of like keeps building up. Like you're like, my God, I hope we're gonna learn something from all this just violence and mayhem. There's no reason for any of this to be happening, and then like nothing
That's
happens. That's it. It just ends. And the
it's so
end.
funny because I feel like at the end of the day, that's kind of the punk rock ethos,
I mean, there's nothing more punk
right?
rock than that. But I mean, it's one of those movies I've told people about it many times, and then they're always at the end like, "Wow, this sounds really fast." And I always ended the conversation the way I'm gonna end it with you. But don't watch this movie. It's fucked up. It's on. You can watch it on Tubi. It's there right now for you to watch. But I'm telling you, it's like I can't honestly say I'm recommending it. But I mean, it as an example of something, I'm like, well, this is a great example of like, you want to talk about a fucked up nihilistic punk rock movie from LA in the 80s where everything just goes horribly wrong. You know what I mean? That's this movie. There's another one called Vice Squad that's kind of like that too, but it's a little bit a little classier. I mean, not really. But you know what I'm saying? Like there's this is like the nihilistic side of all the nihilism. you know?
Makes Repo Man look like a fairy tale in
Yeah,
comparison.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
that's why Repo Man's like a fun romp compared to some of the
Yeah.
other crazy LA punk
It's
rock
all just
movies that were
kittens
coming
and
at the time.
rainbows compared to
Oh,
the real
yeah.
life.
Aliens in the trunk. Who hasn't had that happen to him
I love
here?
it so fucking much when the one the one punk guy opens the trunk and he just, like, turns into a radioactive
A sort of a
skeleton when he gets
skeleton
exposed, and then he just becomes a pair of, like, combat boots.
boots, but like steamy, like with like
Yeah,
steam
Yeah.
no,
coming
so
out of the
it's
boots. Yeah.
what a scene.
Yeah, and I love like when he's in the very first time you meet Otto when they're in the grocery store and he's with the guy that actually is Xander Slosh from the Circle Jerks he's with, and they're kind of having that argument, and then the boss and he pushes the guy, and then the boss comes over and yells at him and he just goes, fuck you, and it's like literally the first time you meet this guy, he basically beats up on what's clearly like his best friend, tells his boss to fuck off and walks out the door. When I was 13, I was like, I love this guy.
Yeah.
I love this. That's my guy. That's my guy. I need to get a sweatshirt so I can tie it around my waist. You know?
And then, like, almost no reaction to being cheated on. It's just like, "Oh man," and then, like, moves on from
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. He literally just like grabs his jacket, like
"I thought you
jerk.
wanted a beer."
Yeah. 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 And also that, you know what? Also, you just reminded me of another thing that's cool about that movie, or makes it kind of a time capsule, is when he leaves to go get the beer, he walks outside, or he walks through the house and goes outside to get the beer. And like in the parking lot are just a bunch of kids to a boom box playing punk rock just in a circle in a mosh pit. Like 12 though. It's not even, you know what I mean? It's not like a concert or anything. There's no band playing. They've just like got Fear, the Circle Jerks or whatever, blasting, and they're just like, let's go. And just like, in a circle running around having a mosh pit. And I'm like, when I was a kid, I was like, "That's happens at teenage parties? I I gotta get some of these parties, man. Like this looks awesome. Beat up on your friends, drink a bunch of beer, listen to Circle Jerks. Damn.
I think it's funny that so we're talking about Fear the band for the first time on this podcast, but we did talk about Flashdance, so Lee Ving is in that movie as well.
He's in a lot of great movies. He's in Flashdance. I mean, he's most famous for he's Mr. Body in Clue, in the original Clue movie.
Oh.
He's the guy that summons everyone to the house and then gets killed and spends the rest of the movie, as a corpse. And he's in a great movie with Tommy Lee Jones called Bad Moon Rising. He's in that movie Nightmares I told you about. I mean, he's been a ton of movies. I mean, if you look at his IMDb, he's been in a lot of stuff. He was even on what was that sitcom? one with Angela and Tony
Who's the
Danza,
Who's the
boss?
you know?
boss?
Yeah, he was Angela's, country, sort of biker boyfriend who sang in a country band in a couple episodes of Who's the Boss. He was also on the Flashdance TV show. He's done a lot of stuff. And now, he's in a band with me. What a huge mistake he's made. I've seen all of his stuff. I'll mention movies Lee's in that Lee has like, he's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, oh that's right." You know what I mean? Because I mean, he made a lot of movies, you know what I mean? But I'll be like, "Lee, you remember when you did that one thing, that movie Pulse Pounders? It never came out, but I've seen footage of it on YouTube." And he's like, "What are you talking about?"
I've seen, Lee play with the Foo Fighters, part of that Sound City
Yeah.
documentary, and I remember in the
Yep.
documentary, uh, I think Dave Grohl's like, "I can't believe that sound comes out of that guy's mouth."
He's still got it, man. I mean, it's crazy. He's still like, that voice is there. He still plays a mean harmonica. He's still got the pipes and the attitude, and he looks good, you know. Um, I think that guy's gonna be singing punk rock like that, till forever. As long as he's got a breath to give, it's gonna be going, "What do they want? What do they want?"
My
You
friend
know?
Wendy, her fiancé is a big, huge punk rock guy, and I remember when they first started dating, like, she just kinda likes she's kind of a pop girly, kinda likes a little bit of everything, and, she got so visibly upset when she talked about how he brought her to see Fear for the first time.
If Fear's a rough one, if you're not familiar with what you're getting into, because 'cause they're not really a normal punk rock band in a lot of ways. The music is very, angular and
Mm,
chaotic, and there's a lot of jazz and prog elements going
mhm.
on within very short, simple, fast punk rock. Some of the songs, and I can say this because 'cause I've had to learn all the songs. Some of them are really straight ahead, they're fast, and they've got some little polyrhythm stuff, but, like, they're pretty straight ahead, and then some of them are absolutely banana cakes difficult. And I was asking the drummer, Spit Sticks, who he's in the current lineup of, Fear, and, I was asking Spit, like, because he wrote a lot of this stuff with Lee, like, why what is happening? How is it that you guys could write a song with 3 chords, like, "I Don't Care About You," and then write a song like "We Destroy the Family" that's just like this mind fuck of a rhythm happening, and he's like, "Oh, well, our guitar player was an engineer and a mathematician," and I'm like,
Well, that explains it. Yeah.
all right, because I wasn't good at math and still am not. So there's that. It's been challenging learning some of that stuff, but I'm a huge fan. I mean, I grew up on Fear, as we talked about, with this connection with Repo Man and stuff. And yeah, Lee's still got it, and the music still to me is just really challenging and awesome. And we just made a new album called The Last Time, and it just came out a few months ago, and Philo Kramer, the original guitar player, co-wrote a bunch of songs on it, and it sounds like classic old Fear. It sounds great. It's killer. Except I'm on it, so it's even better, of course,
Awesome.
but you know, or worse, depending on whether you like what I bring to the table, but
So in
you know.
2012, there was a tribute album that came out called "A Tribute to Repo Man," and Mike Watt and the Second Men cover, the Fear song, and it's pretty Mike Watt does a pretty good job, like, no one's gonna be Lee Ving, and
Yeah.
then
Right.
replacing the guitars with organ is pretty awesome.
There's a great cover. Megadeth does "Foreign Policy" on one of their more recent albums, and that's a really good Fear cover. If you like the Megadeth. There's been a bunch of Fear covers over the years. I mean, I've got Soundgarden from these BBC sessions doing "I Don't Care About You," and Guns N' Roses, I believe, also do "I Don't Care About You" on Spaghetti Incident. So there's been, in fact, my band, the Streetwalkin' Cheetahs, does "Fuck Christmas" on a Christmas covers tribute album from a while back. So a lot of us have been covering Fear for many years.
Yeah, the tribute album is surprisingly okay, actually, to
Yeah,
this.
yeah, I don't
It's
doubt it.
surprisingly
I mean,
okay.
the songs are good.
Exactly,
Yeah,
the songs are good, and there are some pretty heavy hitters contributing. I'm not gonna acknowledge the Amanda Palmer involvement, but other than that, it's not bad.
I'm really upset that I didn't even know about that, and quite frankly, had I known about it, I would have absolutely muscled my way in on that. I've been on enough tribute albums, but a lot of times you kinda gotta know someone involved to get on that list before all, especially with something like Repo Man, there's only what, 12 songs that can be chosen. If it's like a Rolling Stones tribute album, then you could do a double album or something. So, anyways, now that I know that there's a Repo Man tribute album, I will have to check it out. I've not
I
heard
think
of it.
Frank Black is on it, and then, obviously the aforementioned Mike Watt and the Second Man. I mean, speaking of LA punk rock icons.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
I feel like this is a good
Cha
transition into talking about the plugs, which these songs you can't buy the plugs, which are so central to Repo Man. You can't stream them.
Well, so the deal, I don't know all the legalities, but most of the plug stuff is out of print, and I think the plugs, I don't know what label they were on. I would wild guess they were on IRS, and IRS had at one point a deal with Warner Brothers or Sire or something like that. But a lot of that IRS stuff is out of print now, so I don't know what happened, but that was a label that had a lot of great alternative music and punk rock and new wave in the early '80s, and a lot of that catalog, unless it kinda got renegotiated elsewhere by maybe some of the bigger bands. A lot of it seems to be in limbo at the moment. But the plugs are interesting because the plugs were like a teenage East LA
Mhm,
Latin
mhm,
trio, and they went on to change their name and change their style and became the
mhm.
Cruzados, and the Cruzados were interesting because their singer is Tito Lariva, and Tito Lariva, from he had a solo career, but he also is in the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, the Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez movie.
Right,
He's the guy playing when the whole thing erupts into vampires, and all of a sudden the band's on
right.
stage and they're like
He's
vampires
a
too. He's the
regular.
guy on stage.
He's
He's the guy,
in all
yeah,
the
he's in
Rodriguez movies. He's been in
yeah,
Machete and Once
exactly.
Upon a Time in Mexico.
And he's done music for all those and stuff. And then the other guy that was in the Plugs and the Cruzados, that's he's no longer with us, was a guy named Charlie Quintega, and Charlie, or known as Chalo, was the drummer in Bob Dylan for a while, and he was in Izzy Stradlin and the Juju Hounds, and he was in one of my favorite sort of unknown LA bands from the '90s called the Javelinas. And so he was another guy that just kind of had a long, really great career before he sadly passed away a few years back.
Yeah, and I mean these songs that are in Repo Man, I think are really
So
they're
good.
so good and they're so worth discovering and finding, whether you find them on, vinyl or something out of print or however you have to get your hands on them. They're really incredible. El Clavo y la Cruz that appears on the radio when Otto first repos the car and he's in this kind of sketchy neighborhood. That cover of Secret Agent Man, the Johnny Rivers song
It's
Secret
great.
is so good. There's also so much surf influence in particularly in their songs, but I think, like, throughout
I
the movie.
I I'm pretty sure that there's at least one Plugs album, and that there's also I think there's like a Plugs collection. Again, I don't think any of it's on digital now, but you could probably find it on vinyl, or a great thing to look for that stuff on is Discogs. Or also, I mean, quite frankly, one thing I've discovered, if you have the patience to bother tracking it all down, is that everything's on YouTube. So if you just look them up on YouTube, I mean, you might have to go track by track or whatever, but like, you know, you can rip stuff off YouTube. you know. But anyways, the Plugs definitely made at least one album and some singles. I mean, I shouldn't say definitely, but I'm pretty feel like I could picture it, that they made an album and some singles, and it's just all out of print right now. And the Crusados record is great too. They might have made more. There's one in particular, the first one that I had back in the day, and it's awesome. It's sort of like the Plugs, but more bluesy
Mm,
rock. Like they were kind of almost like a bit more Los Lobos with a bit of a Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of
Mm,
thing. Good
yeah, I'll have to
stuff.
hunt that down. So, speaking of music in the film, we have a Circle Jerks cameo in the nightclub, but they're not playing as the Circle Jerks, they're playing as kinda like this loungy band.
And they're doing a Circle Jerk song, but they're doing a lounge version of it, which is great. Because for the longest time, I didn't even know that was an actual punk rock song. Like I just thought it was when he's all, shoobity doobity doo wop 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 wop, yeah. And it, like the hook of the song is like when the shit hits the fan. It's like all like stony and mellow. I just thought that was them sort of on stage riffing from when they shot the scene. And then years later picked up like a Circle Jerks record and was like, oh my God, that's a real song.
that's so great. Yeah, and then Otto's sitting there in the same club, like, "I used to like these guys."
Yeah, I know, right? can't believe I used to like these guys. Yeah, it's a great line. Yeah, and like I said, the Xander Slosh from the Circle Jerks is he's in a few scenes in the movie, but mainly the most memorable one is he's in that opening scene with Otto in the grocery store, which is, now that it's funny you say that. I never really thought about that connection before, and this isn't anything like that deep, but kind of nerdy. But like that's almost kind of implying that, like, the character that Xander Slosh is playing is Xander Slosh from the Circle Jerks, because, like, basically, he's working a day job with this guy, then he goes and sees the guy's band later in the movie, and they become a lounge act, and he even acknowledges, like, "I can't believe I used to like his band," which would be the Circle
Right.
Jerks, because 'cause they're doing a Circle Jerks song, like, an update of it, so it's kind of actually it's just another weird little meta, like, world building Alex Cox thing in that movie is you can kinda go like, "Wait, is he even playing a character, or is that just supposed to be like?" Anyway, I've seen this movie
Well, there are
quite a few
definitely no,
times. I
there are
think
definitely
I think
layers, so
I think about these kind of things a lot.
I thought it was so great, like, the line deliveries in this movie, like, when, Duke is about to die in the convenience store, like, I'd like to say that this is all society's fault.
Yeah.
And then Emilio Estevez is like, you're, like, just a suburban punk kid."
Yeah, you're just a suburban punk
the
kid.
comedy of this movie hits. I was surprised at how funny it actually is. And I
Yeah.
think they use the music in interesting ways to heighten that comedy. There's that great cover of Pablo Picasso by the Burning Sensations.
I love that
Such a
cover.
first of all,
It's
yes, like A plus 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 cover.
that actually might be one where I like the cover more than the original, although I really like the original. It's a
It's
Jonathan
Jonathan Richman,
Richman
and Jonathan
song.
Richman's an acquired taste,
It's
right? Like
great. Yeah, yeah,
he's a weird dude. He's one of my favorites, but he's
yeah.
bizarre.
But
There's
their
something about
version is
Mary's
like
Jonathan Richman.
Yes,
well, yeah, no, absolutely, that's him. And Jonathan Richman, like you said, he's already kinda got this dry, slightly sardonic sound to his vocals and everything. And but their cover of it is like they're just leaning way hard and like it just sounds like the guy just doesn't even wanna
like
be there at all as he's singing. Yeah, it just sounds so bored, and it's like he's taking a song where the guy sounds bored and then, like, outbores that guy, like, it's
100%.
it's
It's so
great,
great, and it's
it's
so great
great.
because it's used, it's playing on the radio when Emilio is trying to pick up, the girl, and, the lyrics are all about how, like, Pablo Picasso tried to pick up women and was never called an
Yeah.
asshole, not like you. You're an
And
asshole.
Everyone calls you an
he's
asshole.
driving down he's driving down the street and the lyrics as it go, "You drive
Right,
down the
right.
street in
El
your El
Dorado.
Dorado, the color of an avocado." By the
So
way,
right.
is there any other lyric in a rock and roll song that rhymes
Oh, with
anything with avocado?
avocado?
I can't think of
But this
one.
is what makes Jonathan Richman so great to me because he's out there doing things that, like, nobody else would
I mean,
try because they seem stupid, but somehow he's pulling them
Emin
off.
I guarantee somewhere out there there's an Eminem freestyle with avocado in it, but beyond that wordsmith, I feel like it's very
Maybe a
unique to
Decemberist
use to
song.
rhyme.
Yeah, well, nah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
rhyming
yeah.
avocado and El Dorado is just
It's
inspired.
pretty that it's
Inspired.
so
I don't
good.
think you can say enough to
It's
you
just
about how much, 1984, like, car culture, Chicano culture is, like, really infused throughout this movie too. Both of those
Yeah.
things are really important. I think that, Tarantino, like, owes a little bit of a debt to this film because I see so much of, like, Reservoir Dogs, and I see so much of Pulp Fiction in a lot of this
yeah.
movie.
Also, I just thought about this, now that you kinda mentioned that, but, like, there was a whole rash of movies from this era where there's some car chase sequence down in the LA
Of
River
course.
like
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
so
So
many.
there's this one, there's Terminator
Yep.
2 has a classic one. There's Grease obviously is the big one, although I don't know, I can't remember if that's supposed to it is supposed to take place in Southern California 'cause yeah. And then what's the other big one? Well, Repo Man, obviously, but there's another big one too. But yeah, back then apparently it was like a thing. Like I've been put it this way: I've lived in LA my whole life. I've never once gone like walked down into those rivers or driven my car. There's so many questions raised. I'm like, how do I get my car out of there if I drive it down there? What if like the wake I can't, get back up? What if there fucking floods? You know what I mean? Like, what if the whole thing floods? Um, I won't even walk down there, quite frankly, but I'm certainly not bringing my car down there. But meanwhile, in all these movies, people are just like, "Let's go race," you know, tearing down, these LA
Yeah, I feel
rivers,
like it was a
man.
trope of the '80s. We're like,
It was.
I'll meet you down
Yeah,
there, and we'll race our
yeah, I'll
cars.
meet you down
One
there.
of us will
Yeah,
survive."
exactly.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
meanwhile,
that
it's
was
like,
a
it's cheap to
thing.
film here, so
But at the same time, like I said, I've lived in LA. I don't know anyone that's ever done that. Not that much of a I mean, it's a trope in the movies, but I mean, if you were to, like, say slam dancing, I go, "Yeah, yeah, LA, slam dancing, punk rock, yep, yep, that's I could that checks out." You know what I mean? If you were like, "Oh, gang culture," I'd be like, yeah, definitely checks out. I've lived in LA my whole life, seen a lot of Crips and a lot of Bloods." But, like, how many times have you and your boys gone down to the LA River with those cars and got like, no, never
right, it's just
once.
it's not happening.
No, no. Cars are expensive.
Right.
Exactly.
I'm taking it.
Yeah.
And 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 when I hear the word river, I don't know about you guys, and I'm no linguist, but I think of a tremendous body of water. And to my knowledge, cars generally are not associated with tremendous bodies of water, and therefore my sensibility says don't take your car into anything that says river.
Correct.
That's me. I'm a Capricorn. You know what I mean? I don't
N
know.
No, I
I'm
mean,
out
my
there.
my five-year-old daughter the other day said, "Dad, you don't drive a car on the water, right?" And I said, "No, that's
Yeah.
when you use a boat."
Right. Yeah, like a ferry. You put your car on a boat and it takes you across the water. You drive your car on water. I guess what are those things called? Those hovercrafts or
Right,
hydroplane,
right, right.
those things that you
Yeah.
see in like in the Florida Everglades or something, sure, okay. But most people are cruising around
Not on
Yeah,
the
do
LA River.
no, do not come
not on the LA
yeah, do
River.
not come to LA, rent a car, and expect that you're gonna go recreate anything there.
No,
It's not
no. No, what you're gonna get is an army of angry homeless people chasing you out of Los Angeles because you've driven your car through the LA River where, at the moment, currently, a lot of them are
it's
living.
accurate.
Yeah. Unless you're trying to recreate, what is it? The Boys Next Door, then Ye
Right, that's a good point. Whoa, good callback, by the way.
Thank you, thank you.
That was a good one. Yeah, excellent. Hold on, I'll mark that down. Good callback.
Ryan had a good callback.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, yeah, I've been taking
Minute
notes on all the yeah, exactly. Yep,
52
got it,
minutes and
okay.
35
I
seconds.
got the time I
You
got the
got the
time code
timestamp? Got
running
it.
back yeah, it's like it's running backwards up in the corner. I one time I'll tell you this, people, people in show business are sometimes so dumb. I was working at a major TV network I'll tell you, it doesn't matter. I was working at NBC. I
yeah,
was at NBC for
drag them.
years when I wasn't playing rock and roll for a long time. I was working in TV and I was a producer and director and stuff. And, I had a guy who was like the executive of a network, and this guy had come from big TV networks. Like he wasn't just some like, hotshot dude that just got it. This is a guy who like developed shows, built networks, knew, presumably had seen dailies, i.e. rough cuts, raw footage, dailies. So one of our jobs was putting together TV commercials and promos and stuff like that. And a lot of times we would be putting them together before the episodes were even completed. So we would get rough cuts of TV shows and start to write and cut the promos from the rough cuts, and the idea meaning you would swap out if the footage wasn't color corrected, if it still had time code, whatever, you'd swap out all that footage once you kind of got the overall green light. I'm like, yes, we like this overall piece. And so I had this piece due on like Wednesday, and like on Monday, my boss, who was already very, very aggressive, very passive aggressive, but let's just say aggressive, came to me. He's like, Meyer, I'm going to need to see that promo. And I'm like, that promo's not due till Wednesday. And I just got the raw footage in this morning. We've got like a very early cut, but like, give me, I need time. Like, I need time for this. No, no, I want to see it in my office now. All right. So I go to my editor, let me get the current cut. He's like, you can't show him that. It's a rough cut. It's not even got the color corrected, it's still got time code and stuff. I'm like, yeah, I know, but the guy runs the network. He knows what time code is and color correction. Let's just show him what we got. He wants to see it. I'm not gonna say no. So I go in and I show him this thing, and he's looking at it and he's like, the color doesn't look great. I mean, first off, I didn't direct any of the footage that he's looking at. I just put together the promo. And then I'm like, all right, well, it's not done yet. And then he goes, and what's this spinny number in the corner? What's this spinny
Spinny
number
number.
in the corner is what the guy who ran the network said to me.
No.
And I was just like, I gotta get out of this business. Like, this is insanity.
That reminds me of, Paul F. Tompkins was doing a comedy bit, and used to work at a hat store in Philadelphia, and he's like, "Some of the dumbest people come into the store." Some guy came in and was like, "Can you get me, like, a king hat?" And he's like, "You mean a crown?"
Amazing.
Yeah, people are ridiculous. I During the pandemic when like everything shut down, and that's like me and Eddie's Spaghetti started making that record because we had nothing to do, and then slowly, you know, restaurants and places were opening up if you serve food, and they would be like, okay, you can come out in the patio, but you have to be like every other table and you're 20 feet apart. And then eventually it was like, okay, we can have some sort of entertainment out here in the patio or outside, but it's got to be like one person. We can have bands. It could be like a DJ or maybe an acoustic guy in the corner 25 feet away, whatever you could pull off so that people could go back and start to feel like they were getting back to life. And so, my job had been furloughed at the time, and then I'm laid off, and like everyone else, I'm unemployed for during the pandemic. And all of a sudden, I hear that venues are starting to do shows again. So I went around to every venue and was like, "I'll play. What do you got?" And they'd be like, "Well, can you do 3 sets of acoustic on a Wednesday night?" I'd be talking to some guy that ran a pizza place or whatever, and I'd be like, "Hell yeah, I can." So I would book 4 nights a week at 4 different venues, doing 3 sets, hour long a night, every single, 4 nights, 3 sets, 3 hours by myself, doing a mix of covers and originals, literally singing for my supper, paying my rent, singing all night. It was great. It was career building. I learned all these great lessons, blah, blah, blah. But it was fucking horrible. And and here would be an example why. I'm playing a pizzeria on a Thursday night at like midnight, playing a Rolling Stones song, and a drunk guy walks up to me, puts his hand, goes, "Hey, man," puts his hand on my guitar, like on the
Mm.
neck of the guitar, like prevents me from playing, stops me, and I go, "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" And he pulls out $10 and goes, "Can you play something by the Rolling Stones?" And I was in the middle of playing a Rolling Stones song when he stopped me and interrupted me, and I was like, "Give me that." I took his money, stuffed it in my pocket, and picked up the fucking song right from where I stopped it before. "Sit down. Send me dead flowers by every morning." And I just, in my head, I'm just like, people are the worst.
They are, truly, people
You,
are the worst.
you two are great. You
Well,
guys
yeah,
are great.
again,
Obviously,
present company
you guys
Yeah,
are,
excluded, but
present
yeah,
company
present company
excluded.
excluded.
generally
But
speaking, people are the
the
worst.
worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if they're familiar with people, but they're the
Yeah, I
worst.
mean, I've heard I've heard since, people have come back to doing shows, like, people just, like,
Yeah.
now just talk or they just film the whole thing. I was
There's
like,
a
"Do you
lot
not
of
remember
discourse.
Yeah,
do
There's a
you not
lot of
remember what it was
discourse.
like to go to shows?"
Well, no, people either don't
yeah,
remember or they just simply haven't learned the etiquette because some people, if you're young, maybe you skipped like an entire formative period where you don't know that you're not supposed to be a dick at shows. Like, you don't know that there's
yeah.
a level of respect for not like shouting out shit at artists. But then at the same time, like, I've been to a lot of different shows across genres, and maybe those people have always been there. They're just worse. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm well trained in this arena because my career and my band, the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, we came up in LA in the mid '90s, which was sort of the height of the shoegazer
Oh, sure.
moment and kind of the alternative scene. So not only was this was before everyone was on their cell phones, but it was during a period where people would come to the show and then just kind of
Do
like
nothing.
do
Yeah.
nothing, not really react, not really care, like barely clap. And then even worse, the fucking bands were on stage, like
Right.
drony guitars, looking down, looking bored. So we were so annoyed by that that when we would play, and this became kind of our act, was like we would essentially jump off the stage and grab the microphones and take the whole fucking show out into the middle of the crowd and start to fuck with people and climb on their tables and smash their glasses over and just do whatever we could to kind of get them a rise out of them essentially. And it became a great training ground, and it also became a great way to kind of develop uh, crowd work, as they call it, which was, the idea that like you kind of size up the room, and if they're with you and you can just stay on stage and do your thing, you do that. But if you need to get out there and take the show to the people, you kind of know how to react on a dime, and essentially also not be offended by people not paying attention to you. Like I said, I came up in Los Angeles. No one gives a fuck about you in Los Angeles, and everyone's in a band and everyone's an actor and everyone thinks they're better and more famous than you. So if you're going to go on stage, you kinda have to have pretty thick skin, if especially playing rock and roll,
Sure.
like, 2000, you wanna talk about thick skin, try playing rock and roll in 2025 anywhere in the world, but especially a big city, Los Angeles, like, it's not what it once was in terms of being, it's not like rock and roll's dead or anything, but it's not like kids aren't running out and going to bars on a Wednesday night and
Right.
seeing rock bands the way that they would and sneaking out of their house and
Right.
stuff, and there's not these sort of scenes the way that there is where it's like, "Oh my god, in LA, there's 50 great bands right now."
Yeah.
Like, there might be 5 great bands, but, not to sound like an old guy or anything, but when I came up, there was a lot more than 5. There was a lot of great music going on in, like, every city. Like, you go to San Francisco, you go to New York,
Mhm.
you go to Detroit, you go to Kansas City, there's this hotbed of just, like, kick-ass rock, punk, metal, alternative music, whatever was going on, and, I think just as far as live music goes now, there's just not as much of a scene for it for, kind of essentially live rock and roll, live music.
Um,
Um, so it's just, again, you just gotta have thick skin. So I don't care if people are on the I really could care less. Like, whatever. Like, when I get on stage, uh, you'd be hard pressed to not be paying attention because we put out a lot of energy with whatever band I do, and there's a lot of effort to sort of connect with the crowd. And so part of my job, I feel like, is literally to get to connect with the crowd in whatever way I sort of feel appropriate for that room and that crowd. So I don't necessarily get upset if people aren't paying attention, but I'm also used to the idea that like, well, my job is to get their attention. So I'm, kinda got all these, like, tricks and stuff that I do to make sure that suddenly whatever I'm doing is more interesting than what's on their
yeah,
phone.
this is a good segue, I think, into, talking about one of our greatest showmen, the godfather of punk, Iggy Pop himself, who is, responsible for the title track on Repo Man. And he does it with something of a supergroup behind him. Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols on guitar. I think Blondie's entire rhythm section of Nigel Harrison and Clem Burke. So pretty incredible that they made that come together. My understanding is they made it come together because at the time Iggy Pop was pretty down and out and just like needed the money.
And apparently his
So
manager liked the movie.
and his manager loved the movie, and Iggy Pop was just like, "Well, yeah, this is like a blessing to me because it's in 1984, I don't think Iggy Pop had like the respect that he enjoys now, and
Absolutely.
was not exactly at like the peak of his career. And I think much in what we're describing, right? Like 1984, not like it's kind of like a hostile time for outsider music,
A few years later, he had a comeback with the Blah 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 album, which Bowie produced. Bowie had a
right?
great knack for bringing out
The
the
best
best
in
of
him,
Iggy. And so this was sort of like between the eras of, he had had Lust for
right?
Life and The Passenger, and, that era of or The Idiot, and Lust for Life were his pair of records that Bowie produced after the Stooges. And then he had a run of solo records that weren't doing that great. And then he reteamed with Bowie to do an album called Blah Blah Blah. And that was sort of the first of Iggy's sort of climb back and then climb into like the legendary status that he arrived at, but after years and years. And this was definitely during that sort of lower period. I think, if memory serves, he was living in LA around this time and he did a bunch of stuff with Steve Jones. Steve Jones actually plays all over the Blah 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 album. And I think this is kind of the beginning of their relationship. And that was sort of maybe not the end, but the end of this period of them collaborating. And in between, they did a bunch of demos and stuff that have come out on some box sets and stuff. But essentially, there was about it looks like a year or two period where Iggy was bopping around LA a lot, working with Steve Jones. Steve Jones at this time was officially a solo artist. I think he had a deal with MCA and was making his solo record at the time. I think Iggy might even be on one of Steve Jones's solo records. So they were definitely kinda tight around this time. And all those Blondie guys, I think, all lived in LA at this point too. Even though they were a New York band, a lot of those guys, moved to LA, Clem Burke and those guys. So that kinda checks out. And yeah, Iggy's the greatest. I mean, he all the stuff I was just talking about as far as, you know, for lack of a better term, my kind of philosophy about playing live and kind of, what the duty of the front person and the singer and the performer is. A lot of that comes from Iggy, it's just seeing Iggy play, hearing those bootlegs of the Stooges and the concerts that just sounded so out of control and growing up being such a fan. He was always so confrontational and such a risk taker live. I mean, physically, like,
Right.
physically taking risks, leaping off stages and crawling over glass and all this stuff, and he kinda had this real sense of, like, genuine danger, not like showbiz danger, but, like, actual danger, like, "Fuck, this guy might actually be out of his
Yeah.
mind right now and might kill
Yes.
himself," you know what I mean? Or kill us. Um, but whereas, you know like another guy that might be in that, not even in the same conversation, but like on the other hand, whereas someone like a Gigi Allen was known for all this like rude and crazy behavior, except that A, it bordered on offensive because, he was involving like poop, but also he didn't have the music to back
Right.
it up. Iggy was writing always from the Stooges throughout his career on the high points to low points. Iggy was always an interesting songwriter. He always was making challenging music. And he always had something to say.
Mhm.
And so when you pair this really, really interesting, very vocal artist with a really, really individual point of view, with this philosophy of showmanship and a frontman who's willing to kind of do whatever it takes to have an effect on the audience. He either wants you to go home a fan or he wants you to go home mortified over what you've just seen. But the idea is you're not going to go home not remembering that you saw Iggy
Right.
Pop. And I always kind of subscribe to that theory. James Brown is
Mhm.
another big influence as a performer. Angelo Moore from Fishbone for me was a big influence, and David Lee Roth of Van Halen, all big influences, all very different frontmen, but I think all of them had this great kind of charisma and this great way of connecting with the audience in a way that a lot of their counterparts maybe didn't do as
Yeah,
genuinely.
I love how David Lee Roth kinda, like, prowls around the stage, like, there's a certain strut and an energy that he has where you can't, like,
Well, and
not look at him.
Dave's thing that I always thought was such a cool kind of point of view is that, like, you were at a party and he was the host of the party. So he's like the ringleader of this three-piece circus of debauchery, or he's the guy, the toastmaster at, like, the greatest, loudest, craziest party with all your best friends ever. And so his whole thing was always kinda he's laughing, his arms are always open, big smile on his face. He's kind of talking to everyone like he's a little wasted, and he's sort of always playing to the back of the room, just like you'd see all these heavy metal performers around that time, they were also like, and angry, and Dave and Eddie just had these smiles, and they're drinking beers, and it just looked like this backyard party. I mean, they always kinda said Van Halen was like the ultimate Pasadena barbecue backyard party band that made it big. And I feel like that's what the best of their concerts were, certainly when Dave was the front man, is that sense of like, "We gotta go to Van Halen. It's gonna be the greatest party ever." You know what I mean? And then you'd go and it's like, it was the greatest party ever. And everyone was going crazy and, everyone was having a good time and the band was having a good time and the music lent itself to having a good time. It was good time party music. Good stuff. And Dave was funny too. Like, a lot of guys weren't that funny. Dave was funny, you know?
Speaking of funny, Harry Dean Stanton is amazing in this film,
Sure
and
is.
he's got, like, a great, like, sort of, like, downtrodden energy. Well, especially, like, in his movies in the '80s, like, in Pretty in Pink, like, he's so good, but he's so good at being, like, a little, like, I need to get like, you want him to get his shit together.
Yeah, yeah, Repo Man's life is always intense. He's very intense in that movie, and it's great because he's playing it very straight. Everyone else is kind of being a little bit more irreverent, but he's playing it really, really straight and dramatic, which is exactly the right way to do that. He's in a lot of David Lynch movies. Harry Dean Stanton. It kinda makes sense, you know, he's got that intensity and he's got that, he's just a really unique guy. He's got a unique way that he delivers his lines, almost like a Christopher Walken or something,
Mhm.
Yeah.
he's all whatever you do, you know he's gonna bring something that you're like, "Well, I didn't see that coming." Like, you know, great actor. He's great in this movie. He's great in lots of movies. Harry Dean Stanton is in a lot of my favorite movies, and I've been on a David Lynch kick recently, and you know, he's in a
I
lot of them.
recently saw him in a documentary. So they just re-released Dig, which is about the Brian's Jonestown Massacre, Dandy Warhol's sort of relationship feud. And
Yeah,
at one point, the Brian's Jonestown Massacre moves to Portland. The Dandy Warhols are like, "Yeah, it's great to see you guys, but you can't stay with us." So they end up getting like some shitty apartment, and they have a party, and it's like 2 in the morning, and all of a sudden, like, Harry Dean Stan's just hanging out with the Brian Jonestown Massacre, and
that's
and it's just
crazy.
like, and then I think, the narrator is, one of the guys from the band, and he's like, "I don't know what just happened, but, like, Harry Dean Stan's, like, sitting on my bed, just, like, jamming."
Wow. When the Streetwalkin' Cheetahs first got signed to Bump Records by a guy named Greg Shaw, who was kind of a LA rock impresario. He signed a bunch of real influential artists. He did Iggy Pop's Kill City record, among other things, which was the first album Iggy made after the Stooges. And he did Josie Cotton's Johnny Are You Queer Now and the Plimsolls Million Miles Away.
Mm.
And he ended up signing the Streetwalkin' Cheetahs. And the same weekend that which clearly must have been a party weekend, the same weekend that he signed us, he signed Brian Jonestown Massacre to their first record deal, and he signed this band called the US
Mhm.
Bombs, who were a notorious, drug-fueled skater punk band at the time. And, you know, it was like we thought us little streetwalking cheetahs at the time thought that we were kind of badass with our little attitudes, and we drank beer and smoked weed, occasionally might do a little something else. But like we thought we were pretty badass. And then we started doing some shows with the US Bombs, who were like, I mean, doing drugs at a level that I couldn't even believe. And then the Brian Jonestown Massacre, who were all just asleep because they'd all done heroin. You know what I mean? They were just like conked out all the time. Like it was crazy. I realized really quickly that I was like kind of an amateur in a lot of this rock star shit when I started hanging out with bands like Brian Jonestown Massacre and Dwayne Peters of the US Bombs. These guys were like professional rock stars, like at a level that my body and constitution can't handle.
Okay, so speaking of rock stars, this will be our last, sort of question. So your brother plays, I won't exactly call him a rock star, but he plays the lead singer of a band called Love Burger and Can't Hardly Wait.
He sure
Do you feel
does.
like you have any influence on your brother's performance in that movie, indirectly or directly?
I don't know if I have any influence over that. It was around the time that so Breckin was the original drummer in the Streetwalkin' Cheetahs, and around the time that he was in the band was when he did Clueless and Can't Hardly Wait, and sort of it was in that era. I mean, I don't know the exact timeline of those movies, but that's essentially the era. One of the reasons why he didn't remain in the band was simply because he started getting all these gigs in a row and was having to go shoot, and we were getting music gigs, and we had just gotten signed to Bomb Records, and we wanted a little bit more of a commitment, like, hey, we're gonna make this record and go tour. And he's like, well, I just got this other movie and I'm gonna be out of town. And we are like, all right, well, check you later. But you know, he's my brother, so it wasn't like a big
Right.
fight or anything, which is like, hey, let's do our own thing. Brecken was all like I said, kinda going back to the beginning of the conversation, like, we were always these little creative kids, like, we were always playing music, and we would, like, put on plays for our parents, like, and, like, put on an album and then lip sync it like we were making a music video, and we had, you know, little Super 8 cameras and would make movies and stuff, and so Brecken very early on went into acting, and I very early on learned how to play guitar, but along the way, like, I continued making films and went into filmmaking as well, and he continued playing music and kept some, you know, version of a music career together. So even when he was doing all that 90s stuff, a lot of folks don't know, he was playing drums in the
Hmm.
Streetwalkin' Cheetahs. And then in the early 2000s, when Rage Against the Machine first broke up and Tom Morello was doing his band, The Night Watchman. Breckin was the drummer of The Night
Oh,
Watchman for a
wow.
while. He played with Tom Morello on his side project band, Street Sweeper Social Club. Both of us played in Wayne Kramer's band for a while. So Breckin always kind of maintained some version of a music career, but his passion was acting. For me, my passion was music, but for a long time, I was making my living, as a director and a writer and doing sort of my other interests. But both of us were always just kind of creative kids. So, meaning as far as going back to Can't Hardly Wait, him and Seth Green was always, not always, but from the early 90s, him and Breckin were like best friends. And he was always around in the early Cheetahs days. They had a band that I produced at one point. And so Seth and Breckin being in a band in a movie at that time with all those people, because all of them were kind of hanging around that scene, like, all of that kind of checks out. None of that was surprising at the time. And Brecken can rap all of Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice word for word. So he's got a lot of musical talent and he always has. And we still occasionally do music stuff or other things together. And we hang out all the time, but he's still interested and still does music. And yeah. A lot of people don't know Breckin is the voice of Joseph in King of the Hill, the animated show by Mike Judge. And he also has been doing Robot Chicken with Seth
Sure.
Green
Sure,
since
yeah.
day
Mhm.
one. And he's a lot of the voices and he writes a lot of those sketches and stuff. And what's funny about that is that when I first met Seth, probably around 90, 91 or something, so he was still a teenager, all that, like the toys they use in Robot Chicken, I'm sure now they're doing it all with computer animation, but at the time when they originally made that show, they were doing stop action, like
Mhm.
old school, stop action type stuff. And that all stemmed from the fact that that was Seth's genuine hobby. Seth would go and like he would take. I'll never forget this. He took a He-Man action figure and he took like a lighter and he would kind of heat up the features so that he could remold them and change them. And then he would like take off the costumes and paint the hair and add new costumes. So he one time for my brother's like birthday or something gave Breckin and he made the whole packaging a David Lee Roth
Oh,
action
wow.
figure. And it was basically just a refashioned
Oh my
He-Man
god.
that he had but he gave it a mic stand and the whole
That's
thing.
awesome.
So when at some point Brecken told me like, "Oh, Seth got this deal and we're gonna go make this show where we're gonna take, action figures and make like dumb, parodies and stuff." I was like, "Yeah, I mean, of course you're gonna do that. Why? I mean, that feels very on
That's
brand."
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very proud of myself that I didn't call you Franklin Meyer today. I was having that problem ever since we booked this interview.
I'm good with it. I get everyone, man. I get Franklin, Frankie, Francis, Francine, Frankles. I get Cheech. I get is it Paco or Pedro? One of those means Frank. I get a lot. I get a lot of Francisco, Oscar Mayer,
Oscar Mayer.
Frank
Meyer.
Sinatra. Dude, I have two hot
You
dog
do have
references
2
in my
hot
name.
dog names.
Frankfurter and Oscar Mayer.
That's
You don't think I've heard you don't think
woo.
I've heard every hot dog pun that anyone could do? You know what I mean? Hey, you want some? Yes, I know. Fries with that shake. I get it, you fucker. Like I can, I hear them all. Like I got them all. Hey, yes, I know. I'm named after a hot dog. Oscar Mayer. Fuck off.
Well, because your brother's name is Breckin, so I was like, Franklin, right?
Well,
And then he was on a
but
show
there's
called
no.
Franklin and Bash, so
You know what you should look up? This is a funny little thing. If you look up on YouTube, when I worked at NBC, I worked for this network called the G4 network. And then we had a show called Attack of the Show. Olivia Munn was on it, and she was one of the hosts and stuff. And they had Brecken on the show when he was doing Franklin and Bash. And they asked me like, "Hey, Frank, I was one of the producers, and I did a lot of like digital shorts and stuff for them." And they were like, "Your brother's coming on the show. We should have you interview him." And I was kind of like, okay. I mean, I don't really do a lot of on-camera interview stuff. Not like I wasn't comfortable with it. It was more like, why would you want me to? They were just like, you're funny. He's funny. You guys will be funny together. I'm like, okay. And I sat down, and the very first thing they wanted me to ask was about Franklin and Bash. And I started kind of riffing as if I'd seen the show, but I hadn't seen the show. And my brother immediately calls me out. He goes, you haven't seen the show, have you? And I'm like, no, I've totally seen the show. And he goes, yeah, which one am I, Franklin or Bash? And I won't spoil it, but
Ouch.
go on YouTube and look Frank Breckin Meyer up. That interview's on there. It is
So
hysterical and it's
funny.
all real. It's so ridiculous that it feels like it's scripted. I promise you, the whole thing it's embarrassing, but it's hilarious.
So good.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Who sits around and watches movies with their brother and you know what I mean? Like I'm very happy about his career, but I'm not sitting there watching Franklin and Bash and Road Trip on my spare time. I've had enough. Like I grew up with this guy. I've watched him on TV. No, if anything, I turn to the channel as soon as I hear his voice come on, I'm like, oh
Oh my God, I
no.
love that you're just
And I mean he's a very nice man, but I mean, come on.
I love that you're at
Yeah.
family dinner, like, "Listen, I love you, bro, but, like, you cannot make me watch Road Trip." It's
No. No. And if I do somehow get forced to watch one of the movies, then I don't call him for like 2 weeks to like balance the scale. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you know what I mean? Like it's enough. It's enough.
it's great.
Yeah, like the first couple of projects, sure, but after a while,
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I saw the early stuff, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, but now, I mean, he's an adult man. I'm gonna watch him on
yeah, after a
TV.
while, it's just like,
That's like
I'm
it's like
glad that your work is fine.
it's like it's psychotic. It's
Oh,
like watching him on a webcam. You know what I mean? Like watch him reading lines. Come on.
Why would I watch my brother play somebody else?
It's embarrassing. I know who he is. I know he's not that guy, that lawyer on that show. So sorry, but I'm not buying any of this because I know if I'm supposed to buy that he's a superhero, then I'm supposed to buy with that she's the no. That's all bullshit.
so good.
So that's
So we are
sorry.
no,
That
no,
was
that's
I'm a
awesome. We're
realist.
That's
not
okay.
cutting any of it.
This is all staying in. I haven't seen Franklin and Bash
Yeah.
either.
I mean, I'm sure it's terrific. I've still never watched the scene, quite frankly. I'm not totally sure which one he is to this day, but I know he was on the
Yes.
show, and I know it's about gorgeous shirtless lawyers that run on the beach, which is, normally that would be my type
Yeah.
of show, but
But not with your brother in it.
no, but not with no. And the guy from Saved by the Bell, oh, come on, I don't need that in my life. This is why my brother and I don't talk anymore, by the way. No, I'm kidding.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, for being on our podcast.
You got it.
So
That was fun.
if you are interested in keeping up with Frank, you can go to thefrankmeyer.com.
Yep, because there's a lot of Germans named Frank Meyer, from what I understand
Yes.
on the internet. When I looked myself up, I was like, "Damn, there's a lot of Frank Meyers, and they're all
Tough
from
out
Central
there.
Germany." Jesus.
They love their
Yeah.
sausage. You know?
No, they do.
What can you
Exactly.
do?
So
Ooh.
yeah, so I became and then my first one was Frank Meyer 666, which I thought was adorable, but uh, not so much with the other people. And occasionally I'd get on like a podcast or something where it'd be like, I mean, I haven't necessarily done a lot of religious ones, but like I directed a bunch. I'll wrap this up. I know where, but I directed a movie. I've directed a few documentary films, and one of them is about this rapper, and the rapper is very religious.
Oh,
And as his director, he and I were doing a bunch of podcasts together, and sometimes they'd be like, "And you can catch director Frank Meyer at the Frank Meyer 666," and I was like, "I gotta change that Instagram."
just check in with the number of the beast.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I doing all this building of like my credibility and like, oh man, I've been working with this guy for so long. And then they're like, and the White Devil, if you'd like to get in touch with him, he's at Frank Meyer 666, just to make sure that's clear.
God bless.
So that's me.
So
Yeah.
thefrankmeyer.com, new album out now.
Thank you. I don't lie, just thank you.
Living
Thank
Between the
you.
Lines. Check it out. It's a great rock record. You can get it on all streaming platforms. If Bandcamp Friday is coming up, you can buy it on Bandcamp Friday.
Sure.
But yeah, thank you so much. We'd love to have you back if you don't mind.
Yeah. You got it, man. As you can tell, I enjoy spinning a yarn.
And
You're
you've
our
done
new
many to spin.
punk rock, like, go-to philosopher, historian. You're like, we have to ask you
Yeah.
back for
Sure, and I'm a big movie buff, so I
Amazing.
can talk pretty much movies all day long, and as you can tell, I'm super nerdy with
Love it.
so
Perfect combo for us.
Right on, gang. Well, great to talk to you and great to meet you. And send me the links and stuff, and I'll promote all this stuff on the social medias and the MySpace and the Friendster and all that
Definitely
stuff.
Yeah,
Friendster, yeah.
Yeah,
perfect.
cool.
Thanks. Well,
Right on. I'll go in the
All
chat
right,
room.
soundtrack 666
Cool.
at Friendster.
Yeah,
soundtrack your life 666.
yeah. Right
And
on.
you can follow us at Soundtrack Your Life on, and you can follow us at soundtrackyourlife.net on Blue Sky, Soundtrack Cast on Instagram, and our Patreon if you want to support us is patreon.com/soundtrackyourlife, where we have bonus episodes, early access episodes, and soon we'll have a Substack. So thank you, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.